I'd like to give a special thanks to Global for their generous support of this program.
I keep up by virtue of the hard questions that our clients are asking us. The space is about experience, whether that is digital or physical space or the combination thereof. We've been talking about the idea of technology as a material. But now it's the pace itself that is changing. It's the systems we interact with. They're sort of the exhaust data that comes from the systems that we already have in place. I mean, at the end of the day, it's data visualization and storytelling. Customer demand has put us in the position of needing to focus on the occupant. Building itself is experiencing as much unpredictability as the rest of us are. We can't just move parts of the building around willy-nilly. It used to be you needed to talk to 6 different people at the water cooler to get one piece of information to create connections and to make the space more compelling from a human perspective. People are not there for the architecture, they're there for one another. Everything that they were doing in lighting and atmosphere and effect was entirely for the joy and pleasure of the would-be occupant.
For decades, architects and workplace designers have been hired to solve a spatial problem. But today's workplace goes beyond spatial into another dimension. The scope of what we design has changed. It used to be entirely about the physical, the floor plan, the furniture, the square footage. But scopes have expanded and include strategy, physical and mental health, safety, experiences, and now our workplace is increasingly digital. And much of the industry is still trying to catch up to what that means. Welcome to What the F is Happening to the Office, the podcast where we talk about the changing work environment with the experts who are leading that change. Hi, I'm Bob Fox, and every episode we sit down with designers, strategists, researchers, and innovators who are rethinking what the workplace is, how it's evolving, and what that means for those shaping new work environments. If you're involved in creating new workplaces, hit subscribe and follow the show. Leave us a comment and let us know what you're experiencing. And if today's conversation resonates, share it with someone who's thinking about the future of work. Also, be sure to check out our State of the Workplace report as a comprehensive look at how organizations are rethinking their real estate, their people strategies, and the metrics they use to measure a successful workplace. The link is in the description below. Today's guest is Melissa Marsh, founder and CEO of PLASTARC, a workplace research, strategy, and design consultancy at the intersection of data, technology, and human experience. She's been practicing for over 25 years, working with organizations like Microsoft, Google, Lululemon, and now Logitech. She's a well-known expert and speaks and writes frequently about the workplace. Melissa, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's nice to be here as well, Bob.
Tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now and what's got your attention.
So I, in a nutshell, call PLASTARC social research and people analytics for the built environment. Our focus has always been to understand the human experience of space, whether that be at the urban scale, the building scale, the interior design scale, even the product and application scale. We've always sat in this architecture and interiors world, but looked at urban design for ways of going about community-based decision-making and product design for ways of looking at experimenting and testing and actually using products before we build 1,000 or 1,000,000 of them. Our work ranges this full scale from products to buildings and sets of buildings. But I think what we're going to talk mostly about today is smart buildings and the measurement of people and the experience within that space that allows us to provide human factors-based, cognitive science-based advisory services on the future of work and place, wherever that might take us.
No, I think we're in an incredibly exciting period of time right now, and the pace of change is just increasing. So it's, I think, a very timely conversation.
You're absolutely right. We've had the change, the increased cadence of change, but now it's the pace itself that is changing. And so we're kind of on our own Moore's law curve here in terms of workplace transformation for sure.
How do you keep up with all of the change in the work that you do?
Well, of course, I read and write for Work Design Magazine. I think it's been nearly 15 years of writing for Work Design Magazine. It's something that I did right at the start of founding PLASTARC. And I think measurement is one of the things I've written about a few times. Though I would say in the world of consulting, I keep up by virtue of the hard questions that our clients are asking us, and then kind of going out and exploring and discovering what the solutions might be or how we might address them. I don't read quite as much as I might, but I'm certainly I get involved in programs, and I think even like today, preparing to speak gives me an opportunity to check my facts and to make sure that I'm up to date on a range of things. But my number one answer would be the hard questions our clients ask.
Well, great. Well, thank you for the plug. You said something that I think captures a fundamental shift in our industry, that the scope of what we design used to be entirely spatial, and now it's increasingly digital. So, what does that mean for how we should be thinking about a project or about the workplace?
The we there is architecture and interiors. And one of the things that they say about designers, particularly architects, is that we're trained and we learn a lot about everything, but sometimes very little about some things. And I think that that is true in some ways. But for more than a decade, we've been talking about the idea of technology as a material. And there's events and programs around material, immaterial. Certainly, we've seen that the use of technology in buildings is not simply about the putting a display on a wall to talk to people or to compete in the attention economy. And maybe we could think that we've got buildings and technology, and they've become more and more integrated, so that there's less of a design the building and a design the technology. And I think customer demand has put us in the position of needing to focus on the occupant. Well, across the history of architecture, we've had architects, I think of Alto or Saarinen, who would have had first and foremost in their mind the experience of the user, and everything that they were doing in lighting and atmosphere and an effect was entirely for the joy and pleasure of the would-be occupant. And maybe we stepped away from that sometime in the practical production of architecture, but at the end of the day, I would say that what's happened is we now have more resources and tools than ever before for what we're designing. So from an architectural and design perspective, we can think of technology as a material, technology as one of the resources that we have for creating the experience that we want. And that's probably more your product or your hardware side of technology. And then we also have technology from a software side that we can effectively design with by virtue of how we're collecting information from the building about the occupants, or even, I think we'll get further into this in our conversation, sort of an AI or predictive sensibility. But what I think this allows, I used to be jealous of web designers because they could put a shopping cart in each corner of a web interface, put it out in the marketplace for 24 hours or 48 hours or test it on users, and then decide where the shopping basket cart should be for the most effective experience. And as an architect, we can't just move parts of the building around willy-nilly and A/B test when we want, but we now have more capabilities than ever before to understand what the human experience is in the space, and even to test on one floor of a building or in one conference room what the human interface is and what yields the reactions that we might want to have. So we're getting closer to being web designers than ever before.
It's interesting. I do think the user experience has risen tremendously in the past few years. I think that we're looking at things now like the health and well-being and those different aspects that tie into the work environment. But I think that the data that you're talking about is already embedded in the environment. So the different systems that we have, from AV systems, laptop cameras, give us real-time feedback on the building experience.
Mhm.
So, what can the building know that it couldn't know before? And how does that impact the human that's using it?
Yeah, so I think it's probably helpful to think of that at two different scales, just the same way as we think of interior design and the architecture or building or even urban design scale. So in the interior design scale, we really have an internet of things. We have all of the things that we touch and interface with and might even communicate with. In our homes, that is probably an Alexa app or a Google app that's saying, what's the answer to this question, or turn on the television. All of my kids have these hue lights that allow you to set the color of your environment, have it wake you up with a sunshiny glow and put you to bed with a cool night light. And in our office environments, it's the widgets and objects and things. It's the systems we interact with, whether that's a room booking system or a space management system. And I would say that those are the discrete things that are probably most closely related to our workplace user experience, which is maybe a little bit different from what the building knows at a systems level, right? So at a building systems level, we're talking about IEQ, indoor environmental quality. You're talking about temperature and daylighting versus artificial lighting and your facade systems. So I think there's kind of two scales of what a building knows and what it might be doing about those things. So at the interior scale, a building knows, or the interior of the building knows things like presence, and that's a current state. But in the future, it could have more of a thermal component. It could know the temperature, stress level of the occupants, etc. And then at a building scale, some of the things that the building knows is both what temperature it was yesterday, what temperature it's aiming to be today. And now we could even hook up a weather report so that the building also knew what the day was going to be like tomorrow. So if you have a cold day with a hot day behind it, you might not heat as much on that preceding day so that your building can plan for the next day. This kind of planning is where our interior and architectural scale intersect, because post 2020, as people have returned to the office in a variety of different capacities, we're seeing that building utilization, while on its way up, is much less predictable than ever before, especially in a full building stack where you might have 20 tenants in one building. One of those companies might have a gravity day on Wednesday, and another company might have a gravity day on Tuesday, and a third company could have, pick your own day. And what that means is that buildings used to be able to plan on how much heating or cooling they needed to provide. And now the building itself is experiencing as much unpredictability as the rest of us are. And we need more sensor systems to, at the end of the day, be much more ecologically responsible in how we're operating our buildings.
You talk a little bit about how the building interacts with the human, and you've described a personified building, one that can tell you the conference room's getting low on oxygen or suggest a different space, or even sense that you're getting stressed out and maybe nudge you to take some other activity. How close are we to that being a reality, and what does that interface actually look like?
So I think the headline is there that the future is here. It's just not very evenly distributed. And so I think that's very much the case. I was working with a product line, Beco Systems, which was a proximity sensor that had an Alexa interface. And I think they sold to Convene maybe as much as 10 years ago. And in that interface, what you could do was be sitting in your conference room and say, hey, where's Bob? And it would know, because it would be able to search location data or maybe tell me what space you had booked, etc. So from a technology perspective, we are absolutely there. And one of the things that you mentioned, the work with Logitech, they're coming out with a product called Spot, which is it's a little bit bigger than a mouse, and it has a number of those indoor environmental quality sensors as part of it. But then it also has connectivity so that you can query a lot of the Internet of Things materials that are in our space. So between the sensor-based systems, the LLM or the linguistic interface, these parts and pieces are all already there. I think we all know in the technology world that the interoperability usability and the connecting things to one another is one of the complexities. So that still needs some work, but the technology is there. Then the challenge is what you want to do with them and where are you collecting data and what are you doing with that data. So, just like any new material, back to our architectural world, the project of the next few weeks and months and years is figuring out what are the best things for putting together in order to create the experiences that we want to have, that we want to make possible within our environments. And just as in design, we need to have an objective. So too, when we're working with a suite of technology products and solutions that can come together to create an experience, we need to have an agreed definition of good in terms of what we're looking to accomplish. We can speak more about that because I think the reason for people to convene and co-locate is to connect with one another. So to the extent that we're designing the technology experience to make that possible, I think that's the focus.
You were talking earlier about the building system and then the more interior system that looked at how people were interacting and working. There might be a third. We talk about this expanding dimension of the work environment. The designer's role might actually expand into the way that we think about, use, and interact with things like Microsoft Teams or Zoom and designing that virtual experience. From your perspective, looking at how all these technologies converge, should designers today consider those types of interactions? Or is there a line that we don't cross and we just say, okay, let IT make those decisions?
We already have that complicated crossover role in IT called architecture, though they tend not to be the ones who are creating the user experience. Also, being someone who graduated from undergrad in the mid 90s and then graduate school in the early 2000s, hitting recessions upon graduation means I have a lot of peers who didn't go into architecture, but went into product design or user experience design or even animating movie backgrounds and urban scenes. So I think that one question is what architects might do with their skills and talents, and that's a pretty long laundry list. The other is I'm almost concerned that we would have to name a product in the digital experience world after a company. You mentioned a Teams interface or a Zoom interface or a Google Meets interface. I have some concern that the way we're interfacing with one another is already a branded experience, whether we like it to be or not. But I think maybe your question is more about where people and a virtual experience and a physical experience come together. You might remember that product called Second Life from 20 years ago. It was meant to be an AI environment in which they actually got companies to come and build a digital headquarters and then would run training in these sort of roadblock like buildings and environments. And, you could kind of log on and walk between spaces with a character. And I think for the most part, the way we have tried to represent physical environments in the digital world has come off kind of hokey. And so hopefully when doing the inverse, bringing digital experiences and environments into the real world of architecture and design, we can be more successful in that capacity. In either case, they're coming together. And I think the expectation of the next generation, especially folks who came of age post COVID or spent their middle school years on video with their friends, have a much more synthesized view and a more integrated experience of what these things actually are. You can see that in the fact that we see gaming chairs in the office, among other things, for sure.
Well, I'm thinking it's this convergence of workplace strategy, people interaction, trying to get work done. And we're creating these digital or these virtual worlds now, which are just as important as the physical environment. They're both tools that enable us to get work done. And I think it's one of those things that's going to be evolving very quickly as we, move into the future. So I'm curious, just
Mhm.
from your perspective, how you might look at something like that.
Well, digital twin is something that we talk about a lot, having a digital model that has a number of repeatable or matching elements of the physical version. And I think that that is one of the ways that we see a future. where currently digital twin is a concept that is used mostly for building management and operations. So you would have an architectural model that is built, and then that architectural model is also encoded with data feeds and information and all the material that is necessary in order to bring that digital model to life and to track the operations and utilization of the building. We did a webinar recently with a colleague who had designed the digital twin for the San Francisco SFO airport. It is so cool. You can look at a digital model and see the gas levels of the airport vehicles and know which ones need a refill. You can track which are the most popular parking spaces on the campus so that when the client says, hey, we need to build a new parking facility, you can know exactly where and which ones and have data behind every kind of design decision we might imagine. So that digital twin is now increasingly intensely used from an operational perspective, but not necessarily from an experiential perspective. That is a possible future. We already have, I think you'll remember this product, Comfy, that is now part of Siemens. It was originally a way that you could vote on the thermostat setting with your colleagues. I want it warmer, I want it cooler. But then also what it enabled was to be able to pair people's temperature preferences with parts of the building. And you and I, as architects, all know that the south side of the building and the solar gain is going to mean that you've got some hot spots over there. North side of the building's probably cooler depending on your HVAC system and your material condition. But instead of fighting over the thermostat, the other function is, hey, Bob, you're a little chilly. Why don't you head over to the other end of the floor and you can accomplish the temperature that you're looking for. So I think the first phase is the information interaction. And then the second phase is the ways that we could be using our physical and digital spaces in a better way. We did a project probably 15 years ago now with a global bank who intentionally designed 3 of their sites to look very similar to one another so that when people had video chat in the environment that they had matching backgrounds and they felt like they were in a similar place. People like to make connections. There's that kind of sketchy psychological study that people were more likely to mistreat someone who they thought was further away physically. So the things that connect us are these combination of what we think is a similarity and then an actual or a perceived distance. One of the things why we call it distributed work rather than remote work, because remote work sounds like it's a long way away and you might not be doing your job. But distributed work, that could kind of be anywhere. So I think all these things work together. The way that when we are physically co-located, we have a level of communication, but when we can be physically co-located in a shared or similar digital environment, or that we can be co-located by the means that we use that space. I have a good friend who travels very often, and he's a bit of a techie. And in order to welcome his partner home in the evening, he sets up an acoustic and lighting scenario, and it creates the experience that he is at home and has set the house for the evening ambiance. So I think this kind of thing allows us to use technology to create connections and to make the space more compelling from a human perspective.
You're talking about a huge variety of different types of sensors. And I'm thinking everything from letting somebody know that they're in the space to something like Alexa, like you mentioned.
Mhm.
Can you walk us through the spectrum from the purpose built, the more opportunistic, and how that helps us or impacts the way that we work?
Opportunistic would be all of in a workplace perspective, all of the things that we maybe implemented in 2020 to keep people 6 feet apart or to make sure that our buildings were less than 50% occupied. That was the New York mandate for some time. Those are things that we put in place, or they came free with the purchase of ... and they can produce data, but we may not have an action plan for or intentionality, that what you call opportunistic. At the other end of the spectrum are the things that are purpose built, designed, an organization that says, we want this to be the experience. We've hitched all the different software bits and hardware bits together to make basically a smart building. That could be hooking together a sensor app, a building access with commuter data. It could give people a nudge on their way out the door. It's raining. You might take the subway and because traffic's going to be bad, et cetera. It could really, it's built with that intentionality of the user experience. It's probably relatively complex and has a lot of parts and pieces hooked together. While it's amazing to do that kind of work, it's just like a big brand new project. It's not often in the architecture world what we're doing, right, Bob? We're working inside of a constrained environment. In the interiors world, we're almost always working inside of an existing building, et cetera. So I would say that space between opportunistic and custom built is where we live as designers. And that's most of the work that we do, which I would say comes down to building a strategy for how you are incorporating or ingesting the data that you do have available, figuring out what you need to supplement that, and then using those two things as a prototype for what you might actually build out in the future or what would be worth investing in. So for a practical example of that, you could have something like, you're building use data, which might come from a variety of different points. And again, this is where we have interior versus exterior data as well. So you may have building badge entry data from a landlord or a building owner. You may be able to have access to that system. You may or may not own that system. You may then have entry data from the part of the building that you operate. You may then have room booking data, but maybe you don't have individual workstation data. One of the favorites is, how many coffee pods do you go through in a day? Can you count people in coffee pod utilization? And so we've always called these our breadcrumbs. They're sort of the exhaust data that comes from the systems that we already have in place. And it almost kind of connects back to a view of history, right? That so much of history is what we know, not because of what was written down by some literary succinct person, but actually because of a log or an inventory or a bill of sale, right? So much of where we get data is maybe from unexpected sources.
I'm just thinking about all the different sources and how you prioritize that. But I'm wondering, is there anything that has surprised you, was unexpected that you found looking at this data?
One of my main headlines, maybe to wrap up that section of the opportunistic versus the self-designed, is it's opportunistic or custom designed, both from a data collection perspective and a user experience perspective. And in the case of the data collection component, which is often where we're focused so that we can bring these insights and predictions for the future of the designed experience, the more data we have, the better hypothesis we need in order to move forward. So it used to be that you maybe would spend a couple of days doing a utilization study, walking through a space. It used to be called, bed checks or head checks or this kind of thing to see who's using who's in an environment or what spaces are being used. Now that information is at our fingertips. And so the challenge is how we're using it, how we're implementing the results. It means that we as strategists and we as designers have to be a lot more thoughtful, because we could spend all of our time combing through data for insights as opposed to getting to those insights. And I think that from what you know of the world of workplace and strategy, that comes down to putting qualitative data and quantitative data together. Because we can take as much building data, ones and zeros, as we want. But at the end of the day, if we don't know what's performing or not performing from a people perspective, we may not know how to adjust the design. So we really need to bring those stories and anecdotes and experiences together with that rich array of data that can really now be at our fingertips.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. It's that the organization is there, it has a mission, it has a purpose, and the workplace is really a tool that helps it to accomplish that, something that leaders can use to bring people together, support them, set the direction for where they want to go. And as you're describing this, there's an overwhelming amount of data that we're tracking now And how do you make sure that that data is getting used to steer the ship where it needs to go and that we're not going off on tangents or diving down a rabbit hole of something that might not be helpful?
Well, I think first and foremost, in any organization, you have a level of data that is reviewed by different positions within that organization, right? Like you don't have the C-suite going through the badge records, right?
Well, but somebody
That
still has to know how many coffee pods to order.
Well, maybe someone needs to know that now, but maybe in the future the building is going to order its own air filters and coffee filters. These are things that don't necessarily need as much human interface as they had before. But to answer your question, I mean, at the end of the day, it's data visualization and storytelling, right? It's the same thing that Edward Tufte has been talking to us about since the 1970s. He used to brilliantly use the white pages as an example of how to organize information. I think the work of design decision making in a large organization is about all the same things it has been in the past. Data collection and visualization, change leadership and communications, getting everyone on the same page and having that shared mission. I mean, you mentioned that the companies have a mission, vision, and purpose. Yes. Do they know how that mission, vision, and purpose can be executed through their physical and digital environments? I don't know. I think that most people in business are trained in whatever their line of business is. And that while we all occupy space from the beginning to the end of our lives, I don't think most people have a complete sort of objective or almost external understanding of the many ways that our physical experience impacts everything from health, well-being, cognitive experience, social experience. Architects are dialed into these things. We're trained in these things. We were kind of born with a lot of intuition in this area. And I think, as you know, publishing, being a publisher and an architect in one, you know that we need to talk and have conversations about this, because once someone hears it, they say, aha, of course. But then before, sometimes it's not obvious. I used to use this simple example of a waiting room where some of the chairs were facing each other, some of the chairs were oriented in this perspective, and just those two things that suggest where someone might sit when they sit down gives an instruction as to whether this is a space to talk to one another or if this is a space to sit shoulder to shoulder and not talk to one another. And so I think that decoding of space and the spatial experience, a plug for another favorite. I'm a coach mentor at MIT, just worked with a team that is launching an app called Well Space that allows us to do exactly this, to take a visual document of our home settings and to establish what are the missing pieces, daylight, plants, position of chairs. Research shows when you have when you have seating spaces for more people in your home environment, you are happier and happier with that environment. You don't even have to have friends over. You just need to have seats to have friends over to be more happy. So I think the point is that not all people are able to have the same insights about the relationship between their physical digital experiences and their happiness, health, well-being. And so our work is partially creating exceptional environments and partially educating people on those connections.
So, as we're putting these spaces together, if the scope of design now includes that digital layer, who needs to be in the room when we're designing these spaces? How does that shift the conversation with clients, and who's at the table now that wasn't there before?
Again, we've always been advocates for HR, IT, real estate, facility management, operations, all of the people in spatial ops. We've always known that these were the connection points. And I think the most exceptional organizations have found ways to mutually incentivize these functions, these people ops and space ops functions. I believe they know that they are the secret sauce to employee experience when working together, and that they should always be at the table together and making major and strategic decisions together and having a shared view of what that experience looks and feels like. I think many companies have organized those roles in ways that are not mutually incentivized. So, in order to increase a technology budget, I had to reduce the space budget. The real estate and facilities person measures their success in increasing square footage. The CFO measures it in decreasing square footage. So I think that the real people who are doing the work know that the connection matters. The organization may or may not have set them up structurally to be successful and to have the shared mission of employee experience. And I think that's the part that's changing more than ever now. We're having new roles called, head of people and places in one role. Does that mean now that someone with a real estate background is now, managing a workday or an HR product or vice versa? And how complicated is that in reality? There's definitely some challenges and some opportunities to learn there. It's about organizations that enable those folks to get together and make a meaningful difference. And I think that's not solely the responsibility of those groups themselves, but is something that's about the future looking organization. That's before we even have a conversation about the head of HR now being the head of the AI collaborator. Or the head of real estate being head of the digital interface as well. But they are all desirably more intermingled than ever before. I'd say our educations are not. And that's probably also something that we have an opportunity to look into. If anything, I think I hope that the architect gets more people and technology education than they got before. I'm not sure if an HR discipline covers real estate and facilities as much as it could. And I think most of our IT certification and education systems are again focused on the technology experience, unless you're looking at something that's more of a user experience, which maybe gets us to the proposition that in some schools the design major is one of the fastest growing because it is about integration. And I think that is between interoperability and integration, that is the thing we're all going to have to be doing more of and better in the future.
I want to use that maybe a little bit as a segue to talk about the use of the office and attendance rates and mandating people to come back and occupancy. And I think that you questioned whether we're bringing people back to the office for their benefit or to protect the value of the real estate. And I'm
I may have
wondering,
said that.
yeah, and I'm wondering, how do you think that organizations are being with themselves about that? How's the use of the office evolving now?
Well, I think this is a perfect chance to get back to the earlier provocations about the why of space. Corporate and office buildings and, just like manufacturing and assembly, first it was about bringing people together with objects and equipment and technology. It still is in the world of logistics and manufacturing, though, certainly for a long time, our knowledge work has been about bringing people together. Certainly, there are benefits to bringing people together physically, and there are tons of benefits to bringing people together through technology and everything in between. But really, the purpose of the office, the purpose of the spatial experience together is connectivity. It's building trust. It's building community. We're doing some work in laboratory environments, and one of the fun things is that when you find a glitch, you may not be able to repeat that glitch on the other side of the world. And then how can two people look at the same glitch if you can't repeat that on in two different places? For different functions and different capabilities, different corporate mission, vision, purpose, there's different reasons to be together. But the design of the space, from my perspective, should focus on what is that reason. And we've predicted for a long time that our workplaces would be much more social in nature. They would be more heavily used for some periods of time and more lightly used at other periods of time. They will be more hospitality driven. We still have all of these individualistic systems in places that we're intending to design for groups. So, you book a desk for a person instead of a suite of spaces for a group of people. even some of the basic systems and tools of workplace management haven't caught up to the next generation of the why we're bringing people together. It's not new information that PLASTARC has been focused on helping people work where, when, and how they want, long pre-COVID. So we really think that the organizations that we work with are leaning into the next generation of figuring that out and figuring out where that wants to be and at what cadence. There are organizations that have long operated in a virtual only model. One of the headlines is that hybrid is here to stay. The only problem with that is that there's 1,600 different definitions of what that is, or as many definitions as employees, et cetera. So the headline is that the space is about experience, whether that is digital or physical space or the combination thereof. And the focus of the next generation of investment in said places and the data that we're collecting in order to make that informed and possible is about the reason people come together. And that's for one another. As much as we love office and we love architecture and we love sumptuous, delicious, extraordinary environments, unless we're talking about actual hospitality spaces or your favorite restaurants, people are not there for the architecture. They're there for one another in the case of work. What that brings us to is if the smart office can help us with why we're there and connect us to one another, then that's a win. You mentioned how Microsoft Teams might interact with the physical environment. In the end of the day, if you connect your cloud-based work environment, which is where people are working on all of what they're working on, all of their files, all of their materials, all of the AI transcribed notes from all of the meetings, that environment is capable of knowing who we are, who we're interacting with, what other teams in the company are challenged by similar problems. And so you could walk into a building and be connected to someone you didn't know you had a meaningful or important relationship with by virtue of all of those connection points. It used to be you needed to talk to 6 different people at the water cooler to get one piece of information. That information could come to you by a smart building system that's saying, hey, Bob, welcome to the office. I know that you've been really struggling with this particular challenge. Might I recommend a seat next to Melissa today? Because she's been working on that as well. And that would end the problem that many are experiencing now, which is that they're coming to the office and they don't know why, because they're not sitting next to a person that they yet know they have something meaningful to share with one another.
What you're talking about there is people are coming into the office and their teammates might be in other locations,
Absolutely.
and so I think we have to take that into consideration. But you're also talking about how technology can help us to match people by either shared interest or shared product
Absolutely.
projects. So that's like a whole different experience from what we've been accustomed to in the workplace. I'm sure AI is starting to interact in that role. How does that change the way that we think about the work environment?
I mean, coming back to this point of co-location and the relevance and importance of it, if if we're, if organizations are going to continue to have the gravity days and the get together days and to invest in the space and the connectivity, then I think we need a new approach to love the one you're with, right? Not to use the office in the same way that you use your home office. You don't walk in and get on the device and do your 6 different steps and do some reading and get back to it and do some emails and some analytics and, go back to the kitchen or the living room. We need a next generation mechanism or set of mechanisms for connecting people and making those in-person interactions meaningful. And the building and the space can absolutely help us out with that. It's the same as the 2 chairs facing each other versus, positioned, elbow to elbow. The way we're using the technology in the environment is offering us the same thing. It can either serve up the recommendation that you sit in front of your device and do your work all day, or the technology can make it easier to connect with one another in meaningful ways. And we just need to get there. It's The same thing, a piece on NPR a few years ago described talking to the person next to you on the bus or the train as a social speed bump. It's hard to hit it at pace and get over it. But once you initiate a conversation, most people are happier with a personal satisfaction level once they've initiated that conversation. They, talk about the weather or the neighbors. Introverts and extroverts are both, we're all social creatures. And I think we just need a whole new framing of the purpose of the office for distributed organizations, meaning the teams are all over the place, the work is all over the place, but connecting with our coworkers is still meaningful. It's just not organized in the same manner as the org chart, the way that it used to be. And that's creating a tremendous pain point for many organizations. And it's making it feel like it's not worth coming to the office for
Well,
many
you
people.
mentioned that with the HR, IT, real estate, CFO, all of these groups have more reason than ever to work together, but they still don't share a common language around what the workplace is actually for. They're all operating off of a different set of metrics.
Mhm.
So, where is that misalignment, and how can the technology help to realign, or maybe I should say align the organization?
That's a big question for this far into our conversation. We may need an entire chapter too, but I'll throw a couple thoughts at it. I mean, there's of course the you can't manage what you can't measure. Then we're not measuring the things that matter. And I think one of the phrases that comes with a world of social research is that of thinking of what is the unit of analysis? What is the thing I'm looking at and I'm endeavoring to measure? And I think part of the not shared language is exactly what we each choose to measure. The designer measures space, you measure that in feet and inches. The digital architect is measuring bandwidth. They're measured on security infractions and security challenges. The HR metrics are about turnover, cost of insurance. So we as professionals all have both different things that we are measuring and measured by. And there's not a lot of overlap in that as a starting point. Being more creative in what those metrics are and how we are identifying new means of measurement in order to have shared quantifiable objectives, I think is a real starting point. And with anything, you need to start with where you are, articulate that, and then start to think over what the crossover might be. And to get back to that unit of analysis, what is it that we are measuring? And this is one of the areas that I think PLASTARC is super fun and creative. We literally create new metrics and measurement. So we have for example experience density. So that is not the utilization rate. That is not the attendance rate. That's not the square footage. That is how it feels to be in the space based on what the space was designed for from a people count perspective and who regularly shows up. So what it means is that a space designed for a certain number of people can feel really busy in one utilization rate, and at the same utilization rate another space can feel, empty and dissatisfying. I also love mixed metaphors, but we are all about bringing those different metrics together. It's moving from basic math to some algebra because there's no reason why we can't have experience per square foot. There's no reason why we can't have satisfaction per day at the office. I mean, we're all working on the space-time satisfaction continuum, and we absolutely have to not invent new metrics, but bring new combinations together in order to yield insights and to have the ability to track the things that we're looking to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that the industry is really grappling with right now because there's people that are still hung up on the traditional real estate metrics, cost per square foot, square footage per person, which are efficiency metrics, but I don't think really get to the heart of what we're trying to measure and how we're trying to improve the space today.
I'd even try to pull that apart because I would say a square foot per person is actually a square foot per workstation, seat, or desk. And even in a current version of those things, we've probably even given a misleading appellation to the metric, and we're not even really making that integrated between people time and performance factors.
I think that if you look at square footage per workstation, how does that correlate to what the organization's goals are doing? And I think that's where we're in this period of transition now that I think we're all still trying to figure out. You had said real estate's profoundly unprepared for the organizational impact of AI. And I think if AI becomes the coworker, it's, no seat required, no commute. I mean, how do you think that's going to impact the physical work environment?
While correct that I made that provocation, I'm not sure that I have the answer for it per se. Again, I can give a couple directionals. First of all, I'd say that in many ways our industry is still reeling from 2020, and we have a lot of things that are as of yet unresolved. And with 5, 10, 20-year lease timelines, we've still not seen either the divestment or the reinvestment that is coming from the rethink of real estate when we've got people in lots of different places. From a what this so we have not yet recovered from that, and as you mentioned at the outset, change in the rate of change. We now have an imminent impact of AI on knowledge work and all other types of work as well. It will of course impact different kinds of jobs and different industries in a variety of ways. At one end of the spectrum, you could say that with AI making up so much BS and hallucinating so much, it's more important than ever before to have someone right beside you to run something by. And that kind of people being co-located and super easily accessible to one another, it's even more important now. You could say that AI is generating lots of stuff that no one's ever going to read, and it's getting sent between people. And it's even more important that we sit down and have a conversation and cut through the email that your AI wrote to my AI. And so you could say that the physical proximity, the trust, and all the reasons why we have place are going to be going to bring us resilience in the case of the AI workforce. At the other end of the spectrum, you could argue that with COVID and distributed work, we needed 50 to 80% less footprint, and that there's another step change coming up on how much footprint we're actually going to need if every third coworker is an AI agent. In kind of further of that, I think it does challenge us to look at if we are asking certain groups of people to come back to the office, or we're designing an in office, out of office, or distributed work experience for people, how we are taking into consideration the roles that are most likely to be augmented by AI in the future. And so one of my challenges is I think it's kind of ironic that many of the roles that are expected to be in the office for many organizations are the ones that are most likely to be impacted by AI in the future. This is just how many organizations' hierarchy and decision making has turned out. And so if you're making space in the office for a group of people, let's make sure they're the ones that are most likely to be coming into the office post date.
This has been a great conversation. I kind of feel like I'm in a meow wolf right now where, we've talked about multiple dimensions. What are you most optimistic about right now?
I would have to say science, research. Every CEO learned about air filtration in 2020. And its impact on human health. And while we still may be having debates about who pays for health insurance and the outrageous costs thereof, I think that organizations are more committed to human health and performance, even from an economics of worker perspective than ever before. We know active minds are active bodies are active minds. So not the basic human health of like, can I get out of bed, but like the higher orders of well-being and longevity certainly line up with corporates getting the most out of their knowledge workers and people. So while when PLASTARC says workplace, we mean every place that people work, factories, hotels, hospitals, offices, schools, etc. We do not speak or intend to speak of just knowledge work. But in this world of how to optimize people's experience when they have a set of knowledge tasks to do, I think that we have more research more research every day than ever before. One of the things that, there's a whole genre and conversation around neuroaesthetics and neurodiversity in environments. PLASTARC has always been focused on multisensory environments and acknowledging that all people experience the world around us in a variety of different ways. The Gen Z, 50% consider themselves neurodivergent. And so if we're designing just for typical, we're not designing for much of anyone. So I think the knowledge and awareness of those topics is the next generation of evolution for being architects and for having resources that we've not had before. I mentioned the web designer who could move the shopping cart around. We're closer to that through digital design than we have been ever before. So that's exciting. And then maybe back to science. The brain science is exciting. And I think that I won't quite say that we should be testing on animals in architecture, but what I would say is that the brains of animals operate much more similarly to the brains of humans than we might give them credit for. And if you want if you want a highly functional tested medical product, we don't start by testing that on humans. We start in laboratories, we see how various animals and cellular systems react to things, and then we work our way up. And so I think in neuroscience, there is a precedent for thinking about how environments inform other creatures and then finding ways to apply that to ourselves. So, we've had since the 70s this research that if a person has a window, they're more likely to recover from their ailment more quickly and are going to need less pain meds. Right. But we can go straight to research. Social research on mice shows that mice who share a habitat and are co-located physically with one another will recover from a disease or illness more quickly. So we have this sense of social touch. If we can be proximate to one another and literally touch one another, we heal more quickly. We heal more quickly when we have a more diverse social network. And so being able to, I'm always getting these questions like, how can you prove that, ... whatever someone wants to have the proof. But I think we need to be more broad and expansive in terms of where we're pulling research to inform the things that we're doing and have a broader outlook in terms of where we're applying science from other disciplines into the world of workplace architecture, etc.
This has been such a fun conversation. I'm going to ask you one last question.
Sure.
If you look out 5 years and we get together 5 years from now, what are we talking about? What's your crystal ball? How do you see the future evolving?
I have to confess, Bob, I've been talking about the same things. You said I've been doing this for 25 years. Practice makes perfect. For at least 15 of those years, we've been talking about the same things: technology, measurement, human experience. Maybe when this goes to post, we can put links to some of the articles that we've written along the journey. Hopefully, I think we're doing the same things, but hopefully with better insights, tools, technologies, and, continuing to focus on the person and the human experience. And maybe, we talk about user experience as singular, the person experience. Like, I think it's got to be more collective. I think our industry has maybe paused on talking about sustainability. Like, that used to be such a big thing, and I'm curious as to whether we feel like we've accomplished it or we've just found some other favorite flavor or color of the month. But I think we've got to rework circularity. When we look at human behavior, we now have a whole new set of resources by which to address sustainability. I got to what I do at PLASTARC and my career, based on the observation that the number one energy leak in buildings is not the windows or the doors or the pipes or the roof or anything or any one building system. It's the collective action of the humans in that building. I think and hope that's where this is going to come back to full circle, is how we can take all of the human applications, focus on collective rather than singular when we're talking about person-based design, and use that for a more sustainable future, so that instead of just making the building smart so that it can talk to you, that it's also consuming far less energy because it's anticipating the habits of the users and predicting next week's weather.
Well, Melissa, this has been a great conversation. I feel like there are so many things that we didn't talk about that we could have gotten into, but I know you're busy. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I'll look forward to doing this again soon. So thank you.
Of course, it's been too long and look forward to more.
And thanks for all of your support and participation with work design.